Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sebastian, the panel director of the International Relations Panel. With an exclusive focus on international economics, the International Relations Panel this year will discuss the Chinese approach to economic globalization from different perspectives: academic, governmental, and commercial. We will explore the impacts of the Chinese approach, particularly the Belt and Road Initiative, on China and the world. We will also explore the opportunities and challenges that Chinese enterprises face as they reach out to a world that saw the rise of anti-globalization currents. I shall now introduce our moderator and speakers. Our moderator is Professor Rana, a British historian and political scientist who specializes in the history of Republican China. He is the director of the Oxford China Center and professor of the history and politics of modern China at the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Oxford. Our speakers are Mr. Fang Qiuchen and Professor Francis Liu. Mr. Fang is currently the chairman of China International Contractors Association, a national organization formed by Chinese international project contractors, investors, and labor service companies. Mr. Fang has worked in China's Ministry of Commerce and has held diplomatic posts as Third Secretary of the Chinese Embassy in Nigeria and First Secretary in Brunei. Professor Liu is Adjunct Professor of Economics and Professor Emeritus of the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Before retiring from the university, he was the head of the Economics Department and Director of the Center for Economic Development. Professor Liu specializes in Chinese economy, economic growth theory, and the economics of corruption. We are very delighted to have our speakers and moderator here. And without further ado, let's start our panel discussion.
Thank you very much indeed for that very kind introduction to all of us and to all of you for being here. It's always a pleasure to be back at the Oxford China Forum with a whole variety of interesting topics and discussions. And it couldn't really be more timely than the session we had this morning on China and economic globalization. And we have two great experts here who are going to talk about that. I think what we'll do is really spend the first part of our discussion diving into the single question which is perhaps most urgent and most debated in global economic circles and not just in China. And that is about the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, also known of course as One Belt, One Road or the New Silk Road. Whole variety of names, and actually the concept itself seems to change quite fast over the weeks and months and years. So I'm wondering if we could ask our speakers in turn first just to say a bit first about what they actually think the Belt and Road Initiative actually is. And I wonder if we start here with Mr. Fang to start with. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, moderator and Professor.
Peter.
Okay, thank you very much for the kind introduction. And I'm actually not an expert at all. And I know that to be a speaker here must be at least the PhD or whatever, but I only got a master's degree in Beijing. And I do not have any of the background, received the education outside China, but I studied in Beijing, the University of International Business and Economics. So I graduated 30 years ago. But I was working at the Ministry of Commerce since then. And it will be my great pleasure and honor to be invited here. Whenever I see all the young faces, I feel so happy to see. Reminds me of my life there when I was in university. So I am so excited to be here and to be with you. But very frankly speaking, I'm not an expert at all, but I am the chairman of China International Contractors Association, which was consists of about 1,500 of the Chinese international contractors. So we're now worldwide, and you know that especially when we have this BRI initiative, so we're got a lot of attention paid worldwide, you know, to CINCA. Abbreviation of China International Contractors Association is CINCA, C-H-I-N-C-A. So I also interviewed a lot by the Chinese media and also attended several international forums here and there because they want to know how the Chinese international contractors, what you are doing and how you are doing there in the Belt and Road countries and what is actually the situation. So I like to take this opportunity to talk very in detail later on, because I know we have about an hour's time, and I'm very happy to be here with a professor. He is a very professional professor teaching in Hong Kong for the whole life, and he told me he just got retired a few days ago. And I think from academia, and Professor Ray can introduce more. I can talk more on the more specific projects that we're doing. So I think it's a very complementary with each other. Since we have another one speaker who could not be here with us today, so I think we have more time. So I give the floor to Mr. Ray for an introduction, and then I will talk about the BRI.
Okay, well, thanks, Mr. Fang. That's a good way to think about it, because, of course, with your experience as a director and in the business world, perhaps if we get an overview from Professor Lui and then we come back, that will be a good way to see how Belt and Road operates on the ground. So, Professor Lui, perhaps we'll start with you. Could we, though, you know, we're taking your professorial status as someone who thinks about concepts and ideas, and, you know, the BRI is a big idea. It's a big concept. Just sometimes it seems a little vague to some of us looking from the outside. So we'd love to get a bit more specifics. What do you think it is, and how effective do you think it is?
Before I say anything about the BRI, I want to say that I'm very much...
Oh, sorry. Okay, got it. Okay, sure.
I'm very much honored to be here. I've heard from some friends who are members of the Oxford Union. So I've heard a lot about this place. And I also read Professor Mitter's great book, The Forgotten Allies, a couple of years ago. And it's a great and a well-researched book. So I was expecting that Professor Mitter was a very senior person. But then he looks very young. Okay. Okay, back to the BRI thing. And because I am an economist, so let me look at it from the economic perspective. Okay. The Belt and Road Initiative involves around 66 countries, and the number of countries actually fluctuates somewhat over time. But let me just say that it's around 66. And if we add all the population in those 66 countries, then they will amount to about 60% of the world's population. But the total GDP is around 30%. So from these numbers, you can easily deduce that the per capita income of the people living, living in these countries is only about 1/3, or even a little bit less than 1/3 compared to the people living in non-BRI countries. So even though not everybody in the BRI countries are poor, the average is lower. Now, that may mean a lot for China's economy. China would like to have a bigger market, global market. And then if we try to compare the prospects of development in the BRI countries and the non-BRI countries, well, there's a chance, actually a good chance, that in the next 20 years or 30 years, the relative share of the non-BRI, the relative share of the BRI countries will actually go up. Or that means those poorer countries would have a better chance to have a higher economic growth rate than the than the non-BRI countries or than the developed countries. But in order for that to happen, there are certain conditions that are needed. Okay? We cannot just say that the lower income countries will necessarily have a higher growth rate. well, very often that may happen, but that is not necessarily true. Just look at, say, some of the African countries, say, several decades ago. They were very poor. But from the 1950s to, say, the 1980s, some of these countries actually have lower per capita income. The income did not go up. The income actually went down. Okay? So how can we try to increase the probability that the lower income countries will have a higher growth rate? Okay? Well, a very important condition is that you want to globalize them, make them part of the global market. Okay? Because the technologies in these countries or the productivities in these countries tend to be lower. Therefore, in order for them to grow faster, these countries would have to be able to learn in a faster way from the more developed countries. And globalization, or linking them with the better developed countries, would be very important. So, if that endeavor is successful, how would that benefit China? And I'm looking at this issue not from some kind of a beneficial point of view, I mean, from China perspective. In other words, China will always try to maximize its own welfare. Maybe it is possible that in the process, these poorer countries will also benefit. Okay, that will be a kind of win-win situation. But I don't think that it is a good assumption to say that China will be making some self-sacrifices just to benefit the other countries. So China wants itself to benefit as well. So in the future, say 20 years later or 30 years later, when these countries, the lower income countries, have a higher per capita income, then that will actually help China to upgrade its own industry and also help China to allocate resources more efficiently. Now, the fact that when these countries become richer, they may be able to buy, and that they may be able to import more goods from China, well, it's something good. But that is not the most important thing. International trade, I mean, the benefit from international trade is really mainly from the fact that each country, I mean, the different countries involved will try to specialize, and then during the process, the productivity will go up. But China itself is upgrading, and its labor-intensive industries will, in the future, be more or less gone, or at least a great deal of that will be gone. So China wants to go into some more high-tech industries or go into service industries. But if in the future there are not enough countries producing these labor-intensive goods, then that will not be good for China. So if China wants to sell its goods to those countries, China would also need those countries to be richer. Otherwise, how can they have the money to buy the goods from China? So I think that just from the economic point of view, it will be very nice for the world to have quite a large number of lower-income countries, to really enjoy some good economic development. So, yeah, okay.
Professor Loy, thank you for that. I want to just ask a couple of quick follow-up questions on your very useful and provocative set of points there before we turn to Mr. Fang for some of the on-the-ground details. What I'm going to do is put to you certain points that people have made about the BRI initiative and get your opinions on that. One is that the reason for the Belt and Road Initiative being pushed forward and being promoted so heavily is partly to do with China's own current domestic economic situation. So the economy is still growing, but the growth rates are beginning to flatten out. There's a whole variety of domestic economic actions which are quite painful, like the deleveraging of local government debt, which has, as we know, created certain unemployment in certain areas. It's meant that local services like schools and so forth have got less cash. And also, broadly speaking, that there's more danger of blue-collar unemployment in China itself. So some people see the BRI as a response to that by basically exporting excess Chinese labor and excess Chinese capital, which is no longer able to be absorbed in the domestic economy, to other parts of Asia and beyond, where maybe it's not always doing the best good that it can. So, Pakistan is one country which is very much part of the BRI. They're building ports, highways, power stations, but people sometimes question whether these are sustainable investments. Is this China solving a short-term capital and unemployment problem, but then storing up problems for the future?
Well, I would believe that some of the policy makers would have got this short-term perspective, just as what you have said. But I don't think that those short-term considerations would be very important in supporting this BRI thing. Okay, China certainly would like its productivity, or what we call the total factor productivity, to improve. Okay, that is the key for economic growth. If we try to do some calculations, or what we call the economic growth accounting for China, we can see that, labor is no longer very important because the Chinese population is aging. That is not a contributor at all. It contributes maybe less than 1% to the whole economic growth. I mean, 1% out of 100%, okay? It is a very small thing. And the capital accumulation is the most important. It contributes to 70% of economic growth. And then the total factor productivity, or the efficiency in production, is almost 30%, 29 or 28 or 29% or so. Therefore, we have to look at it in this way. If China wants to grow faster, it has to continue to make big investments. The savings rate in China is like 47% of the GDP, and then the investment rate is something like 43 or 44%. It's a huge proportion of investment from the GDP. But you cannot just ask people to invest more. You need the productivity to keep on going up in order that people will have the incentive to invest. If the total factor productivity it does not go up, well, and then when you invest, the return to investment will not be good enough. But how are we going to raise the total factor productivity? There are lots of ways that the government should do. One of them is actually to engage more actively in international trade. Okay? So I see the benefit of trade derived from that thing. And then just to get some trade surplus by exporting more goods will not help much. It may be a little bit of help in the short run. I totally disagree with Donald Trump in saying that.
That may not be a controversial position.
Yeah, oh, okay. So it's trade surplus itself may be good in the short run, but it is rather useless. Okay, trade surplus is just equal to savings minus investment. It is just that difference. It is an identity, so it's always true. Okay, it is even not a theory; it's an identity. So we cannot say that whenever saving is bigger than investment, then it is good for the country.
But to bring it back for a moment to the effects of BRI, Professor Lui, what Donald Trump might say, I should say I don't talk to Donald Trump regularly, so I can't speak, but he might say, your economic formula you just gave us is very accurate, and you're a very smart guy, and you have all the graph and all the math. But I have these guys sitting in Wisconsin or in Minnesota who are without a job, and they'll never get a job again. Now, that's America's issue. But going to China, there's a whole bunch of blue-collar workers in Guangdong and elsewhere who are never going to work in a factory again. You know, those jobs are being exported from China to Southeast Asia, even to Africa. And also, there are a whole variety of ways in which China is putting that excess investment into places like Pakistan, Indonesia, and elsewhere. You say that labor is one of the smallest factors in terms of increasing total factor productivity in China itself. Isn't that going to be worrying to an awful lot of unskilled blue-collar guys, men and women, sitting in parts of China who aren't going to get a job again?
Yeah. You cannot solve the problem of economic development by just one policy. I totally agree with you that, in a short run, there will always be some difficulties, some problems. But just look at it from the historical perspective. 40 years ago, China had a lot of redundant or surplus labor. And then, China wanted wanted the private sectors to really emerge. And then that could defeat a lot of the state-owned enterprises, okay? And then some of these will get unemployed. So therefore, at that time, China used the kind of compromise, okay? And it maintained the state-owned enterprises so that unemployment would not go out of hand.
Of course, it injected huge amounts of credit into the economy in 2008 to boost it again.
Yeah. Now, back to the issue of how this kind of policy would benefit the ordinary workers in China. Okay?
Right.
Certainly, I mean, by engaging in this kind of infrastructural projects in various countries, that will help a lot. Okay, so I'm not denying that the short-run problem is there. But what I'm saying is that in the long run, the most critical matter is not just to solve the employment issue. And we also should not forget that the labor force in China has been undergoing a great deal of overhaul during the last couple of decades. Just take the example of education. The number of university entrants, today is about 7-6 million. And back in 1997, it was 0.95 million. So we are talking about an 8 times increase in the number of people who get into the universities every year. And the number of graduates produced in China is bigger than the sum of the graduates in the United States and Europe combined. Okay? So, of course, that will take time for the skill level of the Chinese workers to really go up. But China is doing many things simultaneously. Okay? And then just again look at this example in Pearl River Delta, which is adjacent to Hong Kong, and many Hong Kong businessmen have been going there to invest. Now that place is very different from say 10 years ago, for example. Okay, the low skill manufacturing there more or less has I should not say that they have completely disappeared, but most of them are gone. Okay, and the place is now filled up with a lot of the companies which have which will require high level of skills. So China is changing very quickly. Okay.
So the nature of the changing Chinese economy, and we'll come back to that if we may in terms of the global economy, because that's a really important area. But I want to make sure that Dr. Fang comes in, Mr. Fang comes in as well. We've promoted you, deservedly so, I suspect, because you have a lot of experience of how this is playing out on the ground. And I wonder if we could return to that question of the BRI and how you see it from your own experience in terms of the practical progress that's being made, but also the difficulties. You know, where is the positive, where is the negative in terms of what you see?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mita. You're right, I'm not professor, I'm not a doctor, but I really know from my point of view how to explain about BRI. So you know that in my experience, I used to work in the government for about 20 years, and I got some friends there who are also working in China. We call it NDRC, National Development Reform Commission. So those are the guys who make the policy making, especially they make this policy, or we call it initiative called BRI. So at the very beginning, we call it BRI initiative, is just because, as you have studied here, you know that China is not very well balanced, developed from the coastal areas and also the central and the western part of China. So along the coastal areas like Shanghai, Zhejiang, Jiangsu provinces, they are very developed. But in the inner land of China, in the central and the western part, we're lag behind economically. So the NDRC people, they think that we should have an initiative or policy so that the central part and western part of China can also develop as much as the coastal areas. So they later on, they thought about 2,000 years ago, we have this Silk Road during the Han Dynasty. So we have this Silk Road linking us from the central of China to the Eurasia until Europe. And also to remind them of the 21st century maritime Silk Road from China, southern part of coastal areas, even including Hong Kong, to ASEAN, southeastern part of Asia, until to the Oceanian countries. And then from there to the southern part of Asia, and also to from there through Indian Ocean to Africa. So these two roads link China economic connections with the West. So we use this economic belt and also the maritime Silk Road. We call it BNR. That means Belt and Road Initiative. So when we have this initiative, that was the year 2013. So at that time, internationally, you cannot hear the word anti-globalization. You don't have the what do you call it, like the anti-free trade issues, right?
Protectionism.
Protectionism.
Probably, yeah.
You used the word protectionism, right? Because that was in the year 2013. So actually, this BRI initiative has nothing to do with what we're talking now. It seems that this BRI initiative was just created for the anti-globalization, for the
Protectionism.
Protectionism.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it is not, because that was not the same year. But later on, when Chinese government strongly promote this BRI initiative to the outside world, and you know now we have signed a kind of agreement, we call it for cooperation under the BRI initiative with 140 countries and international organizations for the time being. So quite a lot of international community, industrial community, the countries, they want to cooperate with us. So they raise a lot of attention from the international community now. So BRI seems a kind of Chinese strategy that is just against the American, the policies that they want to come back to Asia again, those kind of policies. So actually it is not. This is a policy or initiative, very open, inclusive, and also transparent to all the countries who wants to participate with us. Because it's a principle is through mutual consultation. We discuss together what projects you are going to do and what you are going to cooperate with China. This is through mutual discussion. And then through a kind of a mutual construction, we build together. And then with a mutual benefits. This kind of principles. But later on, they say the Chinese translate into English. It's not correct, because this is not an English version of translation. It should be a kind of build of all. a built by all and built for all. So this is the correct translation. Maybe you Oxford University students, you know how to translate it. We say 共商共建共享, right? So this is the words in Chinese, but how to translate this philosophy to all over the world, telling them that this is not a policy against someone. This is the policy we want to cooperate with our neighboring countries. Because according to these traditional rules of the Belt and Road, we have about 65 countries which are all under development, you know. So we're all developing countries like China. So we want to together, especially there along the neighboring countries with China, we want to grow together. Like Dr. Mitter, you mentioned about Pakistan. Because Pakistan is very close to China, and we have this economic corridor between China from Xinjiang directly to the port of Gwadar. So everybody knows that we're building this road. We're building the highway. We're also building the railway and ports, power plants, and also economic zones there with Pakistan.
And will the Gwadar port make it more easy for Chinese naval vessels to sail in and out of the Indian Ocean?
But anyway, this is a route, right? This is a route. The Chinese products can be exported to the port, and from there, it will shortcut the transportation from the Malaccas directly to the Indian Ocean, and then to Africa and to Europe. So I think this is a shortcut. But anyway, from this, we can, together with Pakistan, we develop together. We want to generate more jobs and employment for the Pakistan people. And through this kind of corridor cooperation, Pakistan's economy can be booming. So it cannot be always underdeveloped. It should be developed as faster as China, and in the long run, maybe we can catch up with UK. Like the
UK's
better
not
life
doing so
here
well right
in Oxford, right? So this is actually the Belt and Road initiating why we want to have it. So as you know, we also have the 5 major priorities under this initiative. One is the policy coordination. Second is the unimpeded trade. Third is the infrastructure connectivity. The fourth is the financial or financing or financial integration. And the fifth priority is the people-to-people's bond, or we call it people's contact.
So, Mr. Fang, you've given us a really good layout there of the big picture and how it's being implemented in some specific places like Pakistan.
Yeah.
As with Professor Lui, may I ask some follow-up questions to get to some of the detail of this? When you talked actually about the common language, it reminded me of that old saying, which was revived actually by Dr. Sun Yat-sen, 天下为公, you know, that everyone can take part, and perhaps in this case, 天下为霸, the Baji said that.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, let's take Pakistan as an example, because it's an example of something that many people have commented on with the BRI that is a problem that hasn't yet been solved, and that is the word security. Many parts of northern Pakistan, and many parts actually the proposed BRI geography, are places that are not necessarily very secure or very stable.
Yes.
So people are asking some questions. First of all, does this mean a bigger role for the security detail of the People's Liberation Army? In other words, as with the United States, which of course spread its military presence elsewhere in South Asia Pacific, are we expecting that with growing trade, there will also be a growing Chinese security and military presence? If not, where will that security come from? If so, how will the world react to a greater PLA presence in the region?
Actually, because I'm not a military guy, and I do not know whether we have the PLA presentation in this region. Actually, from my understanding, there is no. And I don't know where you got this information. But for Pakistan, for Pakistan alone, because my member companies are working there, we have established quite a lot of projects there. And we never care about the security, because the Pakistan people are friends of China. They call us Chinese brothers.
What about when the Chinese consulate in Islamabad was bombed by the terrorists and killed a certain number of people there?
Yes, this is actually the incident happened. I really know that. I was the guy who also handled this after the incident. So there is some of the extremists. So there's nothing to do, these extremes, you can compare them with the common people. Pakistan people are really friendly to Chinese. They call us brothers. Whenever the Chinese people is walking in the street in Pakistan, and the people, they call it brothers, hey brothers, like this. And then we call it the Pakistan, China, we call iron friendship. You know iron is very strong, very
Iron,
hard.
of course, can rust as well.
For sure. This is the,
And one
but you know what? You call it spade. The spade, if you use it every day, it cannot be rusty. So if you put it there idle for years, and it will be rusted, right? So because we're contacting very closely with Pakistan, let me finish, please. So, and also we call China and Pakistan, we have 24 hours friendship. We call it all-weather friendship. So we never care about the security. So I know Mr. Mita is from, the origin is from India, right? India and Pakistan have the problems, historically. So I do not want to touch, I do not want to touch upon that.
Actually, I'm
just telling you how we're dealing with the Pakistan people, how we want to grow together economically, because we're also neighbors. If Indian welcome us, we will go to India again. So we also have the border disputes with India, you know, in the northern part. So never, we don't want to talk about that. We're talking about the Belt and Road. We're talking about economic cooperation. We're not talking here about the political things, because, right, I'm not a guy, I'm not the PLA person or what you want. So I think in this regard, we don't mind about the security things in Pakistan, but the American will not. They cannot do that in Pakistan. You know that. You know why, right? So only the Chinese people are very well welcomed. But we're not only in Pakistan. Along the Belt and Road countries, these 65, we're all welcomed in Asia, in ASEAN, and also in Africa. So we have, that is why we have a lot of projects cooperated with the locals.
I should just point out that actually it's worse than for me than being from India. I'm actually from Cambridge, which living in Oxford makes
Cambridge.
it's even worse, I'm afraid.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, well let's take
I hope you don't mind I'm talking about that.
No, please feel free. But in that case, let's take some of the other 65 countries that are, you know, part of this initiative with China. You say that China is being welcomed in these other places, but the first thing that Mr. Mahathir, who is the youthful age of 93 when he was elected Prime Minister again in Malaysia, did was to essentially say we are stopping the Chinese investment in the Indonesian light rail system
Malaysia.
because we do not think that the way in which the debt has been structured.
Let me tell you.
Well, let me ask the question first and then let you answer. That we do not think the way that the debt has been structured is good for our country, and I do not think that this is a good Chinese initiative. Is he like your brother, but the brother who's always borrowing money and then he doesn't give it back and then you actually have a family rift, or how does that work?
You see, politics is politics. Let me just talking about Malaysia. I do not tell you about BRI now, because Malaysia, you know how Mahathir, at the age of 92, he still become the Prime Minister. Why? Why, please? Anyone can answer me?
Because he's too young to get a job in China?
And Najib used to be his student, right? He's a very good friend. And why they fight each other? So this is the situation. But since Mahathir, he became the Prime Minister, he must do something to Najib. But only you know that Chinese people are working, collaborating with the Malaysians. We have done so many projects for them. It's not only for Najib, but also next time, when from this year on, also for Mahathir, because we're working with the country. We're not working with who is the Prime Minister. We're not working with the party, no matter who you are. And you're talking about a coastal eastern part of railway, but was suspended by Mahathir after he became the Prime Minister, because he wanted to investigate whether there is the corruption things inside. So he called it off, suspend the project. And he used about half a year now talking to my member companies. Do you bribe? What did you do to him? And they do a lot of investigations. But let me tell you, business is business. And now I think this project will soon be resumed. So you will not have this question anymore.
So next year's China Forum, we will come back and test you on that question. Let me take the question to the economist here, Dr. Ming. One of the accusations that has been made by some, not by all, is that debt structuring within BRI is a particular problem. And it's not just Malaysia we're talking about there. People have talked about the light rail project in Laos and suggested that under current structures, it could cost more than 50% of Laos's total GDP for decades to come. They've also looked, of course, at the case of the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, just outside Colombo, and have seen that essentially the debt structuring there was not sustainable, and it's now been taken back into Chinese ownership. So is there a fundamental problem in terms of the way in which the BRI has become debt diplomacy, or is that an exception to a more successful story?
I think that the so-called debt issue is overblown. I understand that the Western media has talked a lot about this, but let us look at the actual data.
To be fair, the Asian media has talked about it a lot too, including in Sri Lanka, Japan, and elsewhere.
I mean, people who say influenced by the Western media. So let us just look at the data. Just several months ago, I came across a database constructed by some people in Johns Hopkins University. Okay, they have got a complete set of debt data from the year 2000 all the way up to the year 2017. Okay, and that includes all the countries in Africa. It's a specific project focused on Africa. And the African countries have been blamed for getting a lot of these debt issues. But then, first of all, from the year 2000 to the year 2017, the total amount of loans made from China to these African countries combined was only 143 billion US dollars. And that sounds like a big number, but let us look at it in this way. It's 18 years combined, and all the African countries combined, okay? It's about 1% of China's GDP, so 18 years combined. And then let us look at all these individual African countries, okay? There are only 3 countries which have a relatively high debt rate, only 3 of them. And then for almost all the other countries involved, the debt to GDP ratio in these countries is quite a bit lower than 10% of the GDP. So it's a very low, okay? Now, if we look at the foreign debt as a percentage of the GDP in each of these countries, well, we actually will see that the macroeconomic management, well, in recent years, I have to emphasize that it's in more recent years in these African countries have actually improved quite a bit. If you have some time, you may go to the internet and then search for this CIA thing, CIA World Factbook. It's not always accurate, but more or less it's usable. I mean, the data there, I mean, it's a global data, it's a very good resource. You can examine each of these African countries one by one and look at the amount of foreign debt that they have. Okay, it's very low. It's very low. Now, look at say the United States. Okay, the total debt, not necessarily just the foreign debt. The total debt actually has actually exceeded 100%. Of the GDP, and Japan, the total debt is about 2.5%, I mean 2.5 times the GDP, and so on. But if you look at this...
China's debt to GDP ratio is also high, isn't it?
Not very high. Well, I would want China's debt to GDP ratio to be even higher. This is because of the particular economic structure in China. The stock, well, this is a kind of digression, but let me still cover this part, okay? Well, China has, as I have emphasized, has a very high savings ratio, like 47% of the GDP. but China's equity market is a very underdeveloped. The stock market is a very small. So when the Chinese people save all this money, how can they send the money for investment? So what kind of channel can they rely on? They cannot rely on the stock market. I mean, the stock market is like a casino. I mean, it's not a place that you should put your money into. Okay, but then traditionally, people have to send the money to the banks, and then the banks have to give the loans to all these corporations. Okay, well, as such, I would expect that in the future, the debt to GDP ratio in China will keep on going up. But that's not bad. That's actually good. A lot of the Western media do not understand the so-called Modigliani rule of theory after 2 Nobel laureates. Okay? The debt to equity ratio does not matter. It does not change the value of the companies. It only matters to the extent that the people who are going to bear the risk will be different. It just matters in that way. Okay?
If it doesn't matter, Professor Lui, why is the Chinese government spending so much time now trying to deleverage local government?
They are making a mistake.
What?
They are making a mistake.
Wow.
Okay. Now, that is a point that I've been pushing, okay?
So it's not just the Western media, it's the Chinese government
Yeah,
that's got it wrong as well.
They have made a mistake. Now, at least they have made a partial mistake. It is a good thing to deleverage the bad companies. You should not lend money to those corporations. So it is a very good idea, to try to ask these companies to pay back the money, and you don't lend them any money. That part is good. But there are also a lot of very good companies in China whose rate of return would be very high. Okay? So you want to increase the leverage ratio. Okay? So the Chinese government does not understand that perfectly.
I think it's clear that the Chinese government should stop listening to the Western media in that case. It's clearly where you're getting all the bad ideas
I
from.
agree with that.
Very good.
Okay.
Let's stick with that idea of companies, because that's actually a really important part of talking about where China's domestic economy and internationalization are coming together. And I wonder if we could keep with you for a moment, Professor Lui, and then turn to Mr. Fang. Let's talk about companies. One of the things that is noticeable in, let's say, the last 2 or 3 years is that a trend seems to have stopped. And that trend is towards fuller marketization in China. I'm not saying privatization, because actually I think that's a misleading term. It doesn't understand the nature of the relationship, as you know, between the Chinese state, the party state, and the way in which companies operate. But the trend towards marketization did seem to be going very, very strongly for quite some time. And then in the last couple of years, the defense of state-owned owned enterprises, the SOEs, and a push back in which almost the private sector seems to be expected to be providing support for the public sector in China is a noticeable trend. What do you think about those trends? Do you think they're going the right way, and what do you think will happen?
Well, now as a free market economist, okay, trained at the University of Chicago.
You're one of Milton Friedman's children.
Well, I never took his course. I'm younger than that, okay? I don't really like the idea of having the state-owned enterprises to occupy a large share of the economy. I prefer to have this 国推民进. Let the private enterprises advance further and the state-owned enterprises to be somewhat smaller, okay? Now, that has always been my position, okay? Therefore, during the last several years, I was a bit uncomfortable in seeing that some of these state-owned enterprises seem to be advancing faster in a way that I would like to. But after saying all this, I also have to add that there are also good reasons for the Chinese government to really support retain some of these state-owned
struggling sectors like
Yeah.
the massive energy industry
Now,
in China, that sort of
if
thing.
we look at the track record, the state-owned enterprises can easily occupy about can say about 1/2 of the resources in China. But then, roughly speaking, maybe about 1/3 of them, or maybe a little bit over 1/3 of them are making money. A little bit over less than 1/3 of them are losing money. Okay, and maybe the remaining, well, sometimes make money and sometimes lose money. So that is a wasting of resources. However, one of the important reasons why they have been losing money is that at least in the past, the state-owned enterprises were also a kind of welfare units. They were
Iron rice bowl.
Yeah, well, they are supporting the ordinary people, not only in providing the employment, but also in providing some of the social welfare. They have more or less abolished this policy, but there was a policy that after retirement, people, people could get this kind of monthly benefit, retirement benefit from the state-owned enterprises, and that could be very substantial. And say, suppose that a firm has a lot of people who have retired, they're losing money. They're losing money not necessarily because, the business strategy has been misguided. It may just be because they're using up so much money to provide for welfare. So they are not using the kind of market mechanism or price mechanism that we would like to see. But China has been moving away from that kind of scenario. I don't think that it has completely moved away, but in any case, having the private enterprises to emerge will be very important. And now, if we look at all these major or mega corporations in China who have made themselves famous, most of them, not all of them, most of them are really private enterprises like Tencent, Huawei, Alibaba, Baidu, and so on. These are not state-owned enterprises. Okay? For the state-owned enterprise, maybe we can say that the one which constructs the high-speed rail, okay, is to some extent successful, but then in terms of money making, I doubt it. Okay? But then in terms of construction, and well, it seems to be doing very well, but sometimes it may lose money too. Okay? So in order for China to grow economically, it would be a good idea to let the state-owned, to let the private enterprises to grow further. And one of
When you say go further, you mean what, go bankrupt?
No, not bankrupt. Okay.
Then how?
Well, now, some of the private enterprises may be competing with the state-owned enterprises at a disadvantage. For example, in terms of the bank loans, the bank seems to have, the banks I'm talking about the state-owned banks, okay? They seem to have a kind of inclination to provide easier credit to the state-owned enterprises.
So that should be made more even, that there should be equal supply of credit.
Well, I want to have the level playing field now. Take the example of the 4 trillion RMB used by China to say, stimulate the economy after the financial tsunami, okay? Well, most of the money was lent to the state-owned enterprises. But then a lot of them did not know how to make use of the money. So what did they do? They would still borrow the money at a low interest rate. And then they lended the money to some of the private enterprises at a much higher interest rate. So they're behaving like a shark, like a loan sharks. Okay. So that may be a kind of rational for them, but it just tells us that they may not even be able to utilize the resources efficiently.
So let's just take the situation and take it to Mr. Fang. And Mr. Fang, you again see this on the ground as someone who's running an organization, as a diplomat and so forth. What do you think are the challenges and what are the positives of the roles of Chinese companies, both at home and in terms of international trade? We've heard about some of the problems and disadvantages, but what do you think that the opportunities are and where do you think challenges need to be overcome?
So let me get back a little bit to what we discussed just now about the African debt. So I also have a figure here from the Hopkins University research. They say from 2000 to 2016, all the loans from China is about 114 billion US dollars, which account about 1.8% of the total African debt. But who is the largest owner or the holder of the African debt? They also have a figure. It's the IMF and also the World Bank, and also those giant investors from the Western countries, which accounts about 36% of the African debt. So you can compare. So whether this is right or wrong, they say the Chinese increased the debt of the African countries by infrastructure or something. So I think here is the figure that I have here with you. So talking about the reforms of the state-owned enterprises, and I have some of the feelings that because these years, especially since 2018, the central government tried a lot to do the reforms to the SOE. So here I'd like to talk about the SOE. We call it central administered SOEs. That means the central SOEs, which now only have 96 of them. So very directly managed by the, we call it State-Owned Enterprises Supervision and Administration Commission. We call it SASAC, SASAC. So they do a lot of reforms for the time being to let these SOEs to be more and more marketized and also internationalized. They do the reforms for the time being is they call it mixed ownership. So they welcome from the private sector to participate in the restructuring of the SOEs. So they can participate in, and also they also allow the SOEs to become the shareholders of the private companies. So in this way, they can increase the efficiency of the, or the vitality or the mobility of the capital of the SOEs. So the most important thing is the reforms is changing from the past company management to the capital management now. So the central government only cares about whether this SOE, they have the profit earning ability or not. If it is the zombie, we call it zombie companies, they should be cut it off from the SOE management systems.
But they don't actually seem to get cut off, that's the thing.
No,
they're too big to fail.
They did. Last year, by the end of 2018, the central government, they cut it out about 1,900 of the zombie companies, SOEs, because of their lack of the ability of profitable. So also they do the reforms to the SOEs. They call it salary distribution reforms. They want the management team of the SOEs to be more and more capable to run this company to be profit. And then if the SOEs get profitable, you can have your salary as high as you want because the central government will not care about anymore. They do not regulate the maximum, the ceiling for the salary. Just in this case, to encourage the SOEs to be more and more internationalized, more and more to marketized, like more and more vitality, and they will have. So I think these reforms will, for sure, to encourage the SOEs to be more competitive internationally and also domestically.
Could you speak more about that international factor in that case? I mean, what do you think at the moment are the possibilities, but also the challenges for these Chinese companies to be operating overseas?
But for challenges, I think not only for the Chinese companies, but for the foreign companies, they're all the same. Because we're not a company just coming out of China to international markets. We have already been there for 40 years. Since 1979, when we have the reforms, opening up policy in China, the Chinese companies have already go global. And up till now, like my member companies, they are almost everywhere in the world. We are in about 190 countries and regions in the world. And you can see, compare with our contract signed last year. We signed about 241 billion US dollars of contract last year only. And we finished about 190 billion US dollars of contracts worldwide. So the American, they have an ENR, they call it Engineering News Record. So every year they listed the top 250 companies, international contractors. My member companies last year, we have 69 listed in the American top 250. That means we're very competitive now. We're very strong internationally. And they have also the figure by the ENR. They say the market share of my member companies, that means of the Chinese companies now in international infrastructure sector, we account for about 23.7% of the market share internationally. That means in the world, everywhere you go, you see the infrastructure projects. There's 4 projects. One was done by Chinese companies. That means we're so competitive. Everywhere we go, we're also facing the challenges like the Westerns. We're competing with the Americans. We're competing with UK companies, Spanish companies, Swedish companies, which are very strong international contractors. In Asia, we're competing with Japan, Korean companies, and even Turkish companies. They're all very strong ones. So the challenges we face are almost the same, politically, economically, and also the security issues as well. But for the project itself, also we have a lot of challenges, because when you're coming to a country, you meet a lot of local people, shareholders, all the stakeholders. They might be causing the problems, the risks. So all the risks is everywhere. I think I cannot finish talking here just in 10 to 20 minutes, but I think I can talk the whole morning only on risks. So the challenges is everywhere. And now you see the American, the Donald Trump administration, they cause a lot of uncertainty for the world economic development, for the world economy to develop, for the collaboration between the China and also our neighboring countries, and also with the Western partners as well. So this uncertainty also caused a lot of challenges as well. As you mentioned about Malaysia, when they have suddenly a new government, that means government changing is always a very challenging risk that we face, because everything you have to go renegotiate it again, and you have to talk again. And also suddenly when you have the projects, the new government, they say this is the project for the former government, and we do not admit, we do not recognize the legal procedures or something like that. But I think the most challenging thing for the time being now is the competitiveness of our partners. So we're changing our way from competitiveness into cooperation. So now we have a third market cooperation strategy. So the Chinese international contractors, we collaborate with Western companies. So we join hands together, we form a kind of consortium to bid for one project. So when we work together, you cannot only focusing on Chinese companies to accuse us. So because we are a consortium, we work together. So if there is the risk or challenges, we also bear together. So that is the way, I think, whenever the trend will be cooperation. Cooperation will be always the trend, and then you can develop. So,
right, thanks for that, Mr. Fang. I would just take to Professor Lui for a moment. With this question then of the possibilities and the challenges for Chinese companies in the international market, again, as an economist, what's your view about where those possibilities and challenges lie?
Well, there are several issues here. The first is that the Chinese companies, in order to do well, should specialize in things that it has a competitive advantage. Okay. And then when Chinese companies are selling goods produced in the mainland and then export the goods to other places, China has been doing well in that regard. But China did not do that well in the past. Before the open door policy, China tried to rely a lot China used up a lot of resources for those heavy industries which were capital intensive, and that was not good. And then after the open door policy, China changed that strategy completely. Okay? And in the future, China should continue to do that. And when China tries to collaborate with the domestic companies in other countries, China should also pay attention to what the competitive advantages in those countries are. Otherwise, if you try to do something which are not suitable for those economies, it will lead to a lot of failures and so on and so forth. Okay? And another thing is about public relations. Okay? The Chinese culture, in many respects, may be different from the cultures in other countries. And we are talking about at least 66 countries for the BRI. And China invests not only in the BRI countries, China invests a lot. Okay? So there will always be some suspicions, some cultural clashes, and so on and so forth. I think one of the good ways is to resolve this problem is to hire local people to help China to develop. Just look at this Huawei case recently. The spokesperson for Huawei in many European countries and even in the United States are not Chinese. They are professional people hired from the local places, and that would make their voices, make their reasoning more persuasive. I don't mean to say that what they say will always be able to convince Donald Trump or some other people, but then that will help a lot. Okay.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah, good. Yes. Okay.
We call it localization. Yes.
Yep. The localization, I think, I totally agree that it is a very important thing. But the key thing
can I just, 1 minute?
Sure. Yeah. Quick reply, Mr. Fang?
I just reminded me of the developed market, because we're talking about the challenging things. So when the Chinese companies will really face a kind of challenge, that means in the developed countries, we face a kind of security review, or you call it a security checks or whatever. So when you enter this market, they have a very strong security review on you. So you never know whether you can be access to this market or not. This is a real challenge that my member companies goes to the western part of like America, and even in Australia, they also have the FIRB, right? They call it the Security Review Organization. American, they call it CFIUS. So they all have this. So this is actually a kind of technical barrier for the Chinese companies to be access to the market.
What's the name of the organization in China that does that for Western companies that want
So we
to
don't have
telecom?
now. We don't have. We never check. We welcome all the foreign countries. That is why you can see in China, we have more than 10,000 of American companies. They also do the very good localization.
And how many of them have access to the security and telecom sector directly?
I think 0. We don't
maybe,
check.
Maybe in future.
Yeah,
maybe in future.
When we're getting
Now,
more stronger, when we have our competitors.
I think as both sides no doubt open up to each other. And speaking of opening up, I think this is the moment at which we should widen the conversation, our fascinating conversation with our two speakers here. And I think we have plenty of people in the audience who I'm sure have got questions or comments that they'd like to make. Could we see hands, please? And I think, are there microphones coming to you? Okay, we've got a whole variety. We'll try and get the whole room. Okay, lady over there. Yes, yes, your moment has come, madam. Yes, mic coming to you.
Hi.
And why don't you also briefly tell us who you are and what your kind of presence is in the forum? Are you studying here at Oxford, for instance? Who are you?
No. Hi, my name is Helen, and I'm currently an international relations course student. And I have a question to Mr. Fang. Is that you have mentioned lots of terms that's about cooperation, globalization, that's related to international relation. And I believe a lot of audience and students in here today study a major that's related to international relation too, and want to have a job that's related to foreign affairs and diplomacy. So such as myself, I want to become a qualified diplomat for my homeland, which is China. And my question is, like, because you are a person that's like have a very have lots of experience on foreign affairs, diplomat, and so I want to ask, do you have any suggestion or advice that you can give later generation that want to have a job
okay,
on there?
Thank you. So that's the first job application we've had during the Q&A session. Mr. Fang, the lady would like to become a Chinese diplomat. What advice do you have for her?
So study hard and learn more. You know what? When you have this good question, and then I think you have the good experiences, and you try to acquaint it with the Westerns, exactly you know what they think. That's very helpful. When you are in one country, you should know what their thinking is, the mindset is. When you understand them, and you can really know how to deal with them. Diplomacy sometimes is only the word to make the world more harmonized, but sometimes a lot of struggle in it. So you have to prepare for that.
我们都知道西方人的想法都是非常奇怪。Okay, gentlemen here.
Chinese, right?
Yep, go ahead. And tell us who you are.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Brian Coe from studying law at Exeter. So first of all, thank you for the amazing sharing by all the speakers today. And so wrapping up a bit, with all these considerations, do you consider the Belt and Road Initiative as a key to restructure and reaffirm a new globalist economic order? That's my question. Thank you very much.
That's a great question. Thank you for that. Let's take it to perhaps Dr. Lui, Professor Lui, about that. Is the BRI really part of a new globalized economic order?
Yes, I will agree with this. Now, actually, there's a little bit of technical problem with this term BRI in relation to globalization. Okay, it talks about the Belt and the Belt and Road. Okay, so it's related to the silk, export of silk and porcelain and that kind of things. If we stick to this to the meaning of the BRI, the countries included should also have South America and Central America, because the first globalized city in the world was Mexico City during the Ming Dynasty. China exported a lot of the silk and porcelain through the Philippines to the Mexico City, and then the Mexico City exported a lot of this to Europe. Okay. But China, it seems to me that China does not want to include the Americas, because that would include almost the whole world. And that could raise a lot of suspicion. Say the United States will be may accuse China of doing something in its own backyard. Okay, so maybe in the future it could include that. But even if we are just talking about these 66 countries. If the whole initiative is to be implemented correctly, it would necessarily involve a lot of competition in the future, international competition. And competition is very useful in raising the productivity in China or elsewhere. Okay? But even without the BRI, China has already been trying to implement a set of policies which will improve the competition that SOEs would have to face in China. Okay? Even without all these negotiations with Donald Trump and his team, China has already had the plan to reduce some of the tariffs and then let some of these enterprises to go into China. So China does not necessarily just want to benefit other people. All these kind of maneuvers actually would help China itself. Okay, so but with the BRI, the competition will be even keener. Now, just one example in that regard. Now, China is selling, or to some extent exporting the so-called China model. By the China model, I don't mean the political model of China. I just mean the business model. Okay. Now, China's economic success to a large extent has been due to the fact that it respects the competitive advantage that it has. And some of the African countries today has been able to lift themselves out of poverty, mainly because it is now using their own competitive advantages in a more effective way. A few years ago, Ethiopia sent a big team of people to a company making shoes in the Pearl River Delta. They stayed there for several months. They learned all the things, and then they established some shoe companies back in Ethiopia. But that is not the only thing that they did. They also made use of the Hong Kong model. What is the Hong Kong model in the Pearl River Delta development? The Hong Kong people invested there. They have all these kind of joint ventures and so on. So China also sent a team of people to Ethiopia. They had all these kind of joint ventures. Why was joint venture necessary? First of all, that will help to impart the know-how, the knowledge more effectively. But more importantly, if you ask a very lowly developed company to engage in international trade or in manufacturing, they simply may not be able to do anything. Well, they do not have the expertise. So you need the other partners, the joint venture partners, to improve the credibility, the international credibility. So, but by doing all this, China is building up its own competitors. But I think that's okay.
Okay, yeah, no, as is mutual advantage, as you say. Let's keep the hands coming up. Gosh, you've got plenty of them. I'll tell you what, I'm going to take a couple of points and then come back to the panel so that we get as many voices in as possible. So what about the lady in red shirt on the front row right here? And I'll take two more and then come back. And then...
Hi, so I'm a first-year undergraduate student of Chinese Studies. And my question is addressed to both of you. You were mentioning regarding the BRI that I think it was specifically Mr. Fang with the translation and the helping of understanding what the goal and aim of the Chinese are with these partnerships and alliances. But my question is, with this idea of politics of, let's say, of slogans almost, do you think that from a non-Chinese perspective, when understanding, let's say, the BRI, if somebody doesn't agree with it, do you perceive that as an aggression as opposed to, by the Chinese, if they don't understand what's being said, if that's an aggression against it, as opposed to truly understanding what's going on and just not agreeing with it?
Thanks very much. That's an excellent question. Let's just take a couple more and we'll come back to our panel. Right at the back of the room there. So I'm making the guy with the microphone run, but to try and have equity and justice, which we're all about here. Right at the back.
Hi, my name is Alexei. I am a graduate from LSE. I studied anthropology and development. So I'm interested in the sustainability of the BRI projects, and I was wondering if as an observer, I can feel that the KPI for state-owned enterprises is the profit, and the profit can be delivered instantly by just delivering the project. How about extending KPIs to the sustainability and to measure again the success of the projects after 10 years? If there is any plan to do that kind of measuring of the success and usability of the projects that are being delivered. Thank you.
Sustainability is an issue. Thank you very much. That's great. And let's take one more as well. What about the lady over there? Yes. Yeah. Yes. Smiling now. Microphone to you.
Years been teaching.
Well, thank you for providing me with this opportunity. I'm a spatial planning student from Oxford Brookes University, and now my question is under the present situation of Brexit, and as we know that, the relationship between Britain and the European Union has to be remodeled, and do you think this will provide any challenge or opportunity for business inside China and here in UK?
Okay, thanks very much. Three excellent questions there. I'm going to try and sort of separate them out to our two speakers to get some responses there. First of all, let me go with the last one first to Professor Lui, because in a sense it's a question about economic systems and order changing. Do you think that with Brexit and the changing of the EU, we don't really still know exactly what Brexit is going to look like just 5 weeks beforehand, which is an act of lack of planning that the Chinese government would never permit, but in Britain it seems to be happening. Do you see a change in terms of the relationship between China and the EU and Britain in the international order, when Britain obviously is changing and shrinking in a sense?
Well, that is not an easy question to answer.
If you had the right answer, the Prime Minister would like to see you, I think, tomorrow morning, but give it a go.
Of course, China did not anticipate the Brexit and so on and so forth. Okay, but then, to some extent, the Brexit could increase the need for the UK to build up a better economic relationship with China. Okay?
Exactly.
So that is to China's advantage. Okay, and then
is it to Britain's advantage?
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah, as well. Okay. Okay.
Just checking.
Yeah, and then I think that having a stronger Europe with the UK staying there may also be good for China, in a sense that the EU could be regarded as an independent force, which can build up this kind of balance of power. If the EU is weakened or the UK is weakened, then politically speaking, it could also cause some problems for China. And I suspect that the Chinese leadership has not really figured out what it is going to do.
Just one thing on that particular point. I think there's a fair consensus amongst most geopolitical analysts that if the EU is weakened, then Russia would actually find that something of an advantage. You're saying that China would not share that position? Well,
the relationship between China and Russia could be quite weird. I mean, on the one hand, Russia is, of course, China's ally or semi-ally.
Like brothers, perhaps?
Yeah, like brothers. But,
or maybe your drunk cousin.
Yeah, but that may not be a very reliable brother. So the better way is to have Russia to have problems with EU and to have problems with the UK and so on and so forth. I mean, then China keeps itself out of all this. I mean, but it's easier to say than to do. Okay.
I'm sure that's right. Speaking of things that are easier to say than do, Mr. Fang, the question of sustainability of BRI projects over the long term obviously is a question, not just for China, but it is something that China was thinking about. And the lady at the front had a very interesting question. When people have BRI explained to them, is it okay, does China accept that some people would just not agree? They would say, we understand your position, but we don't share it. What do you think of that?
Never mind that at the very beginning in the world, we have received quite a lot of negative response to us. So that is because BRI has a very unique and very Chinese characteristics, because it's the Asian Chinese Silk Road. So why we should follow up, why we should follow your suit. So things is like that. But later on, when they find it out, it is an initiative, it's very open, very inclusive. So we welcome all the people who show interest to participate with us. So that is why we have more and more people that agree on this, because it does not have any political things. It does not have any geopolitical things or ideological things.
Not everyone would agree with that.
Yes, because it's only on the economic side. So if you want to work with us, we work together. If you say, no, please.
But many would disagree with that.
We have more friends
also it has a geopolitical role as well as an economic role.
Yes, but some of the Western media, right, they like to write in this way. They say something political driven or things like that. But you can have your own opinions, but facts will show how we are working with the foreign our counterparts.
And what about sustainability?
Sustainability now is a very key word in infrastructure, because in my association we have the guidelines for the international project sustainability for the Chinese international contractors. It's like a standards for the Chinese companies, because we work this standard together with the international community, with the World Bank, with the Asian Development Bank, with the EBRD, and also with Harvard University. And we have
Oxford in future.
Yes, yes, because we do this framework for the Chinese companies to follow. All the projects you have done, it must be sustainable, because economically, socially, and also environmentally, and the sustainable. And also the project itself should be also sustainable, because you have to think about, you have to consider all the stakeholders in this project, the local government, the owners of the project, the community, and the environment, and all these stakeholders, the local partners as well. So it must be a very sustainable project before the multilateral development banks, the financial institutions, they can make you the financing. Otherwise, you cannot get a finance. It's not like I want to lend my money to you. Only you're my good friend. I trust you. I can lend you my money. I'm not a fool. I lend my money to everybody, right? So think about that. So things is the same, like the Chinese government. We're not lending money to everyone, because this project is badly needed by this host country. And they want it to develop. They want to encourage their economic development. So they come to the Chinese government and say, can we do this road, this highway, because we badly need it? And then we start to consider what kind of financing we can use and how we can make this project more sustainable and the profit return later on after 10 years. So it's a lot of things. It's a very complicated project. It's not like just talking. Talking is so easy. Do one project, you will know how difficult, how complicated it is. Quite a lot of risks and you have to consider. So we are there all 40 years. We really know.
Okay, thanks for that. Lots more hands I see, so let's take a few more questions. Okay, right at the back. Sorry, I'm making everyone run. Yeah.
So it's not only from Oxford, they're also from some other universities.
Yeah, it's a very popular event, absolutely. Okay.
Me, also very interesting short. Can we just both ask a question? Thank you for the opportunity. And first, a quick comment. I think personally, I'm currently doing a PhD in Warwick about cultural policy. So first is a quick comment. I just think.
Sorry a minute, could you just speak slightly more slowly? The microphones are not
Sorry,
very good.
not
It's not you, it's the
okay.
mic is very
Sure.
poor. So.
So for me, I think this Belt Road initiative is not only economic strategy. Actually, it's more like culture branding process. So I think that we should actually have more to do to brand China and to show what is our progress and what we want to achieve in the future and cooperate with the rest of the world. And also I'm an entrepreneur myself, and last year we started our business called Devote, which is called Devoted to China. And we are in Birmingham, we're trying to help the small to medium British business into China. And our purpose, we talk about a lot about state-orientated and infrastructure-orientated project. So my question is, what do you think about the private sector? How about entrepreneurial? Do you have any cost build of the road initiative has been implemented for years? Do you have any economic
Okay, thanks very much. A
about
question
that?
about the public sector there. We'll just make sure we get as many people as possible. Thanks for that.
Sure.
Other hands? Yeah, let's make Paul Woody not walk so much. So let's take one in the middle there. Yeah, what about, there's a lady, I think, in the middle, second row, just where we are there. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. I'm Stella from London Business School. Because we are now in the UK, so I want to hear more of your opinions about the China-UK relationship, and especially on the situation we know about the Brexit and also the US-China trading intention. So I want to know how would this affect the UK and China's economy collaboration? Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. And just in fairness, we'll take one more from this side of the room as well. I think this would be, yeah, with the green shirt, you've got your hand up for quite a while. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Lucy. I worked in Kyrgyzstan and Pakistan before, so my work is also related with BRI. So my question to Mr. Fang is: so what are the major problems or the most difficult common issues that your member companies often raise to your association? So,
you mean to do with Central Asia in particular? Or?
Yeah, Central Asia. For example, in Central Asia.
Okay.
Okay. Would you please be more specific about the major challenges and the common issues and difficulties and problems? I think that's a very interesting issue that not often mentioned about. I mean, both in Chinese media or Western media. So. Very
good question, thanks. We'll take one more from this side, because I think then after that we'll have to bring it to a close. So let's take, gentleman right at the back there with the blue. Yep, your hand's still up. Yes, right back row. Yes, you sir. Yes.
Thanks very much. Thank you to the moderator and to the panel for coming to talk to us today. My name's Jonathan. I'm a cancer research fellow from the University of Oxford, but one-time investment banker, so varied background. It is probably mostly to Mr. Fang, and it's around sort of how the evolution of decision-making processes for politics in China. There seem to be, it's very easy to blame Donald Trump for some of the problems in the world today. But there are a lot of intractable problems. For instance, things like technology transfer to Chinese companies, how to interpret things like the ownership of resources in the 9-line map, and heaven forbid, Taiwan. And some of those issues could become very big issues, or some of them could be kept as sort of in shades of gray. I just wondered how, as an insider, you anticipate China managing those decisions going forwards.
Okay, thanks very much. We've got some great questions and obviously limited time, so I'm going to divide up between our speakers, if I may. And first of all, the question actually about the public sector, that's really interesting, Professor Lui, because obviously we're talking a lot about the move to the private sector, but the public sector still has a role in terms of the Chinese approach to spending and investment. Where do you see that going in the near future?
You mean how the public sector will be, how the government will be making decisions of where the money would go to?
Yeah, in terms of the investments and so forth, where do you see the decisions being made, and how do you see the public sector still being included as part of this process?
You mean inside China or outside of China?
I think the implication was actually both inside and outside China.
Well, for the part outside of China, we have some reliable studies about that. Okay, the key concern or the key determinants for investments in different places is really the ability to pay back. There was a study also at Johns Hopkins. Actually, it's a kind of econometric study. I mean, they have listed a whole lot of factors which may be potential determinants. Influencing the decision making for giving loans and direct investment and so on and so forth. They found that the key thing is whether you can pay back the money. Okay, that is also related to the sustainability issue that I mentioned earlier. But inside China, the question of where money will go to, I believe, would still depend a lot on the political forces. The interest groups and so on, but will still have some impact on the decision making. Okay. Now, of course, the economic part or the long-term strategic part would also be important. For example, say in the past, when China was making its decisions, it did not really pay much attention to environmental sustainability. It did not. Okay, and then when they calculated the GDP, they did not take into account the damages to the environment. But now, because China's GDP has gone up a lot, and that has created a lot of the people belong to the middle class. Okay, people would desire different kind of things, and the government has to respond to all these kind of changes. The middle class people like to have good environment, okay, and then in more recent years, China has actually begun some very important initiative to improve the environment. If you visit Beijing, for example, just several years ago, 80% or 90% of the time that you visit Beijing, you will encounter smog. The whole sky would be very dark and so on. But today, if you go to Beijing, the chance that you see the blue sky and the white cloud will be much higher. My own experience is that in about 60 or 70% of the time that I visit Beijing, which I visit very often, okay, is that you do see the white cloud out and blue sky, okay? So it's due to some very important initiative taken by the Chinese government itself. And I've heard from some of those experts talking about those, okay?
That's wonderful, President. I'm sorry, I've been told that our time's beginning to come to an end, and your point about the environment as important for the public sector is a really important one, so we'll take that there. There was quite a lot for you there, Mr. Fang, and we've got a limited amount of time, so I might just focus in on one question, which I think you're very well qualified to answer in this, which is about Central Asia. In a sense, Central Asia is an example of a different problem from the one we were talking about broadly before, because you said, governments change in places like Malaysia, or, people change their minds, that sort of thing. But Central Asia, with very few exceptions, are basically authoritarian governments. They stay pretty stable. Either people rule or their sons take over. It shouldn't actually change that much in terms of politics. And yet, we have the implication there seem to be problems with dealing with Central Asia as well. What would you say are the challenges of dealing with other authoritarian states?
But actually, I would rather answer the question about China and UK relations, because I know that much better than I understand about Central Asia.
Okay,
but I will answer this question first.
Sure.
Central Asia, I visited last year, and I had a very good, deep impression that not all the countries, the 5 Central Asian countries, are very open, because they're still under the double check systems. For example, when you do the investment there, you cannot get your money back. They cannot change to the foreign currency and remit your money back. So it seems that it's very difficult to make investment there. And very frankly speaking, my member companies, that was the weakest part that my member companies work. We only do some of the hydropower, small hydropower plants, and also some of the road projects. And sometimes when we have our collaboration there is for political things, and we do some foreign aid to these countries. And we also do some of the industrial parks there for the investment, but not big projects happen in the Central Asian countries because of the policies. They don't even have the PPP law. So when you make investment there, they don't have the law to guarantee to secure your investment. So that's the problem for the time being. But I can see they are more and more opening up to the outside world. And the World Bank, they spend a lot of money there, but...
Could we perhaps have a fun... I think they're trying to shut us down, just to make sure we get a final thoughts about the UK-China relationship, because you said you wanted to speak briefly about that.
Very briefly, and this time I'm not coming to Oxford, but I'm coming to London. We have China-UK Infrastructure Alliance. So also the UK government, they strongly support the Chinese BRI initiative. They even appointed one of the special envoy to BRI from UK. He used to be a former minister, secretary from the government. So we are going to very closely collaborate with each other in a third market, like in Africa, like in South Asian countries, for the year 2019. We want to have a pilot project jointly between the UK company and the Chinese companies. We start together this project utilizing financing together. Maybe UK is very strong. You have advantage in architecture, in designing, and in the project management, and in the financing, because you have the City of London for financing, the financial house, the hub. So the Chinese companies are very strong in construction, and we utilize our both advantages. We want to do some of the pilots projects this year. So that shows a very strong signal that UK wants to collaborate with China, and we're very confident that Chinese companies will be the good partner of UK.
A very good note to end. I'm sorry to have to cut off our wonderful speakers here and indeed the audience, but we've run out of time. Could I then thank our wonderful speakers, Professor Lui and Mr. Fang.
Thank you, good moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the enlightening and intriguing discussion that just went on. We'd like to extend our gratitude towards all our three distinguished speakers for coming here to give us this talk and discussion and share their insightful views. May we now first invite our speakers to leave the union first, and then our members of the audience can leave later.
Thank you. Very nice to meet you, and hope to see you again.